Greetings to all C3RF members and friends across Canada and around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as they view this video summary of the C3RF update for 11 July 2025. The title of this update is Enough is Enough, and notes that there is a small but very dedicated contingent amongst the Canadian population writ large that knows better than the rest of us. These morally superior beings look down their noses at the mass of Canadian humanity and bemoan the fact that a culture underpinned by individual rights and the rule of law stands in the way of their own plans for transforming Canada in a bigger, better, and faster fashion. After all, how can the major issues of the day, issues that require centralized planning and execution to be resolved, be dealt with if all the cats or the free citizens need to be herded and headed off into preferred directions? And there we have it. In the minds of the morally superior, perhaps it's not so much the issues of the day that are the problem, but rather a Western system of governance that stands in the way of them realizing their righteous designs. In other words, the end justifies the means when it comes to their inspired desires, and cats arcing off in every direction are just not helpful. Seen in this light, the issue isn't so much any particular threat that society needs to address as it is a value system, culture, or tradition that works against the implementation of centrally planned solutions controlled by the favored few and their toady experts. This conundrum sets the cats amongst the controllers and has been a facet of the human condition from time immemorial. Indeed, it is safe to say that historical systems of governance have largely been made up of what groundbreaking psychologist Andrew M. Lobachevsky termed to be pathocracies. In his 1984 magnum opus Political Ponerology, he posited that such dictatorships were not anchored in any particular ideology, but were engineered by political psychopaths bent on achieving absolute power. The end result is a pathocracy that corrupts institutions before moving on to dehumanize or destroy innocent others. The fact that centrally controlled pathocracies dominate the field of human governance is evidenced by the dearth of societies throughout history that have allowed cats to roam freely. It was a world of lords and slaves up to the Greco-Roman era, in which democratic principles began to gain traction through the development of city-states and republics, respectively. Such experiments with representative government, however, would prove to be tenuous and ultimately overtaken by barbarians, quote, who were admitted into the empire in greater numbers and allowed to remain in their own tribal associations, unquote. A definitive move to the instatement of societies based on the sovereignty and dignity of the individual would only come much later, when a slow-burning Judeo-Christian belief system caught fire on the heels of the development of the printing press and the Gutenberg Bible. It was only then that the cats had truly been set amongst the lords and slaves' pigeons. The combining of the Bible with the Gutenberg printing press would prove to be the nexus of whole societies based on the concept of individual rights and freedoms and the rule of law. Concurrently, the printing press would prove instrumental in kicking off an age of enlightenment that advanced rational thought through deism that stood for, quote, rational inquiry, for skepticism about dogma and mystery, and for religious toleration, unquote. The combination of Christian and Enlightenment thought would inform the founders of the United States of America as they drafted their Constitution. In the end, they would cobble together a constitution that underpinned the formation of the greatest and most powerful nation in the known history of mankind, or peoplekind if you're using the woke vernacular. It would be a nation premised on allowing cats to roam freely and requiring truth and service-based leadership to inspire good men and women to come together in common cause. And so it was that free societies would rise up to successfully challenge those based on older lords and slaves doctrines. Indeed, the cats would be herded successfully to crush fascist and Nazi ideologies that would emerge in the first half of the 20th century, before moving on to collapse the economy of the Soviet Union. Communists were forced to admit that overtaking Western societies with their economic/class warfare messaging was a non-starter given the latter's upwardly mobile labor forces. Accordingly, they would improvise, as noted in these update pages, and implement the Frankfurt School idea of marching through the institutions. The strategy involved using identity-based narratives to divide the denizens of Western societies through diversity, inclusion, and equity scams. Instead of workers unite, the new divide and conquer mantra would be victims unite. Still, the march through the institutions, although showing promise in Western jurisdictions, was just taking too long to unfold. Division through acrimony and massively reckless migration policies would need to be supplanted by good old-fashioned flashbang measures. These would include those that would emulate, quote, an explosive device that produces a blinding flash of light and a sudden loud noise intended to temporarily stun, distract, and disperse people, unquote. Flashbangs are indispensable in creating the fear and distraction needed to quickly stampede cats off in preferred directions and can be seen to be used throughout history. Such historical parallels with present-day Canada have been chronicled by John Carpe in his recent #1 bestseller entitled Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter was Betrayed and What Canadians Can Do About It. He notes that the Nationalist Socialists used the Reichstag fire as such a flashbang, even as the Wuhan virus was put to flashbang use in the present era. Carpe goes on to note in his dedicated C3RF In Hot interview that Canada's recent reaction to the Wuhan virus public health crisis swept up many of the tactics used by the Nazis some 90 years ago. These were instrumental in overriding democratic checks and balances to allow the lords to take dictatorial charge. Now as then, citizens were asked to follow the science, even as the judiciary and clerical classes allowed themselves to be coerced into accepting newly minted pandemic measures as irrefutable. To make matters even worse, the echoing the Nazis' use of the, quote, decree for the protection of the German people, unquote, to, quote, ban publications, the content of which was likely to endanger public safety or order, unquote, Canada would attempt to legislate the control of disinformation and even thought through Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. It should surprise no one, given these stunning similarities, that the party under a new Prime Minister in the form of Mark Carney is contemplating the revival of Bill C-63 in the current parliamentary session. If the Wuhan virus was the flashbang that opened the door for compromised and corrupted institutions to lock down and even jab distracted Canadians, then one could argue that Orange Man Bad's threat to subsume Canada as a 51st state was yet another. The discombobulation that ensued was quickly set upon by the Liberal Party as an elbows-up moment that would deal with the new threat to Canadian sovereignty with, quote, purpose and force, unquote. Unfortunately, the movement with purpose and force would not entail the participation of your elected representatives, as the government would move without an in-place budget to requisition over $70 billion through special warrant protocols to fund unknown operations. Of greater concern, however, is the fact that Prime Minister Carney would move to enter into an international agreement with the European Union that would realign the nation's security environment and trade obligations writ large. Canadians could be forgiven for sensing the days of lords and slaves was now upon them. As the business of government moves on, absent inputs and oversight from elected representatives, the risk of biased and arbitrary decision-making grows even as the rule of law slips away. As it stands now, the country can be seen to be careening down a path that an all-powerful Prime Minister has predetermined. This path, in accordance with his own written words in his book, Values, Building a Better World for All, notes that, quote, a committed government policy framework can pull forward sustainable investment and shut down unsustainable activity that is no longer viable in a net zero world, unquote. Given a recently passed Bill C-5 that allows his administration to pick infrastructure project winners and losers that potentially, quote, contribute to clean growth and climate change, unquote, should Canadians fear being left out of the related deliberations? Enough is enough. Your MP needs to know that how you feel through a face-to-face this summer, and he or she might be asked the following questions. For example, who do they work for? Do they work for you, a political party, a political leader, or an offshore pressure group? How do they plan to restore a compromised and corrupted civil service that is no longer capable of enabling the rule of law through impartial and unbiased operations? What will they do to shed light on the plethora of scandals that besiege the nation, including the Winnipeg Level 4 Lab, Green Slush Fund, and ArriveCan debacles? Are they okay with funding the government for an undeperiod period of time, lacking any budget or parliamentary oversight with special warrants? And should those who ignore, trash, and abuse the Charter be held accountable? Finally, let us know how your MP responds by emailing us back here at C3RF. No names are pack drilled, but it would be useful to shine a light on what your MP has to say. In closing, a reminder to join us at CanadianCitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including all of the links to all of the cited documents. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF member updates from its drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.